Hello BookTube. Recently, Daniel at the BookTube channel Guilty Feet revived an old BookTube tradition that had happened years before. Years before that, Matthew at Mayberry Book Club had decided to ask in a video whether or not I had read basically all the books in the world. Certainly had I read all the books in his collection in his tiny house. So he picked a few books and asked, has Steve read all of these books? He didn't pick main highway things that he could be fairly certain I had read. Instead, he picked slightly off the beaten path stuff and made for fascinating viewing, and the question itself fascinated BookTube because everybody wanted to know. And a whole bunch of videos cropped up in that fad when it first appeared years ago. But Daniel decided that fad faded away, and he decided that wasn't right, that he wanted a chance to try it himself. A lot of the people who watch my channel now didn't have BookTube channels back when Matthew made his first season, as we're calling it now, of Has Steve Read It? So Daniel revived the whole thing for Has Steve Read It Season 2, and we have been embarked on that for quite some time. And more applicants pop their heads above the parapets all the time. The goal here is to walk a fine line. Pick books in your collection that are not so well known that I, who have been reading an enormous amount of books for a very long time, will have read them for sure, but also not books in your collection that are so obscure that that there's no chance that I nor anyone else has ever read them. You want, in other words, to give me a fair chance. And you want to pick about 8 books in English or an English translation. And the second season of Has Steve Read It has been more popular and more widespread than the first one, and with a huge number of people jumping in to give it a try. And so I'm making a response video to every one of those videos. And I have a response video for you today, but before that, I want to offer a correction, because for the last couple of Has Steve Read It Season 2 episodes that I've been responding to, I have said that we right now have no standout individuals. The overall showing has not been all that good. Out of 8 possible successes, each success is a bean. Each success is a little schnauzer icon. Out of 8 possible successes, we've had no one get 8. We've had no one get 7 or 6 or even 5. There has been a 4, and there have been a few 1s and no 0s. So both ends of the spectrum are unoccupied. But in a few of my recent videos, I've been saying that there is no single individual at either end. There are a group of people mulling around, crying in their beer at 1 bean, and there's a group of people sort of holding their heads up high at 4 beans. And Hannah, at Hannah's Books, Voxered me earlier today, and started out her message with, "Oh, bless your heart." And when a Southern lady starts out anything with "bless your heart," you know that your life is in imminent danger. And there's a reason for that, because her baby boy, her brilliant son Abe, got 4 beans and is the only person to get 4 beans. So Abe is alone by name still the supreme sovereign of the known universe. So it's not that credit is being shared at both ends of the spectrum. He is the kingpin. He is the one to beat. And we'll see if today's contestant can do that. Today's contestant is trying the mother of all baptisms of fire. The contestant today is Matt Ellis. And his video entry in Has Steve Read It Season 2 is his very first BookTube video. This is how he's choosing to start out. Not the BookTube newbie tag, where he says that he's really looking forward to community and he isn't sure what new or interesting thing he can bring to BookTube. Not anything like that, but poking the bear is his first video. And in this video, he gives his 8 choices for books that may win him a place in immortality. Imagine if your first BookTube video was a victory in Has Steve Read It. It would be something to tell your grandkids. Not that they're going to know what books are. Not that they're ever going to have heard of BookTube. We will all be gone by then, including all digital record of what we're doing here, if I read my cards correctly. Nevertheless, we can enjoy it while the sun shines. Unfortunately, Matt Ellis, in his Has Steve Read It video, resorts to the last refuge of scoundrels, which is CanLit. This is the whole populist cheering section of Canadian literature. And he does this because it is, by definition, off the beaten path. If you have a beautiful, peaceful, kind, well-mannered, and slightly retiring country, you don't have all that great material to work with for literature. but not only is it off the beaten path, but it's also a bit of a sore spot with Steve. Because not only did CanLit give us Margaret Atwood, whose novels are, I hesitate to point this out, I know it's going to be bitter medicine for you fans out there, but her novels are noticeably dumb. She's a noticeably, not she herself personally, but her novels are noticeably dumb novels. They don't make any through sense, not any of them. They don't have any good writing. They sort of plod. And the last 5 of them have plotted in an absolutely palpable sense of self-importance. A horrible combination. the lack of talent and the increase of self-importance is a horrible combination. Take it from me. But not only is it Margaret Atwood, but it's also my bête noire, Alice Munro. The absolute in-person totem of CanLit, who is one of the greatest literary frauds of the 20th century. She has no talent whatsoever. None at all. It's not that, I mean, Alice Munro's novels are noticeably dumb, but occasionally there will be a sort of lipsticky set piece that maybe a little bit works. Occasionally there will be a concept here or there that on its own, on paper, just written out on an index card, is kind of interesting. Alice Munro rigorously fails to work out those concepts, to examine them in any way beyond the shallowest depths possible. But at least they're there. With Alice Munro, there's nothing at all that's there. Nothing. Not only is the prose mind-numbingly quotidian, but everything else associated with Alice Munro's literary reputation is mind-numbingly quotidian. I have often joked over the 170 years that I have been talking about Alice Munro, I've often joked that every single one of the things that she has ever written, I think she's written 11,000 short stories. They're all virtually the same, including the names of the characters. Every single thing that she has ever written can be safely and accurately boiled down to aunts consulting train schedules at the kitchen table. Aunts consulting train schedules at the kitchen table. That is Alice Munro, and it's just that interesting. Absolutely mind-boggling to me that she is considered a world-class literary figure, and she's Canada's. They foisted her on the rest of the world. So this is a little bit of a sore spot, but I haven't read nearly as much CanLit as I've read, for instance, American Lit or British Lit, so there's a chance. Matt Ellis may have stumbled upon the route to victory. Let's see. So his first book is Arrival by Nick Mount. And this is a story, sort of a narrative story of CanLit itself. Canadian literature and also the movement of CanLit that started about 50 years ago and has been gaining steam ever since, making literary headlines in some places. And this would ordinarily be a no, this book. I would not have bothered to read it. But years and years ago, before I started BookTube, but after I was aware of BookTube, one of the earliest BookTubers that I watched was a huge fan of CanLit, and really reminded me that it exists. Aside from Margaret Atwood and Alice Munro, I wanted to sort of blot it out of my mind and just celebrate Canada for William Shatner, instead of condemning Canada for blighting my reading every season with some of the most boring literature in the history of the world. That BookTuber years and years and years ago made me think, okay. There are a lot of smart people here writing lots and lots of interesting books. Maybe I should give CanLit another try. And naturally, because I thought that, I wanted to give myself a lay of the land, and this is the book that I found. Ordinarily, it would not have been on my radar at all, but unfortunately, it is a yes. Then the next book is Any Known Blood by Lawerence Hill, which is about one of the terminus points of the Underground Railroad. And Matt Ellis, in his video, I wrote it down because I simply could not believe it. The quote is, if you ever come to Oakville, Ontario, if I ever come to Oakville, Ontario, then there's a whole museum there. There's all sorts of historical markers there that I can... To which I wanted to respond, is Oakville, Ontario, Australia? Are those two things the same thing? No. Oakville, Ontario is not Australia. Well, then I have been to Oakville, Ontario. Okay? I have been to the building where Matt Ellis was filming his video, in which he says, if I ever come to Oakville, Ontario, I should visit this, that, or the other thing. I've done a large amount of traveling. I have made no secret of that on this channel. I have been. But anyway, Any Known Blood is a yes, and once again, a little bit of a tenuous yes. Lawerence Hill wrote a book called The Book of Negroes that managed to achieve a large amount of international notice. People talked about it. It got widely reviewed in the U.S. And that, I read it. I didn't particularly like it, but it intrigued me enough to find this book and give it a read. And I didn't like it either. I don't think that Lawerence Hill is all that talented. That's I don't know what explains this, but it struck me as, well, actually I do, in a way, know what explains this. If you grow up from the age of 8, not only being told incessantly that Alice Munro is the greatest writer in the history of the world, but implicitly being urged to imitate her, then by the time you get to your MFA program and then launch out into the world, she's going to have a pretty big imprint on what you write, and it seems very much of a type. So, Any Known Blood is a yes, but it's not a recommend, at least not from me. Then the next one is The Company by Stephen Brown, which is about the Hudson Bay Company. And it also is, yes, it's actually a very engaging history. You wouldn't think that. And that has often not been the case with me. Often histories of some of the famous predatory, world-straddling economic, the East India Company, for instance, some of those have not, the subjects might on paper be interesting, but the books just weren't. But this one was. This one I enjoyed a lot. And I should point out that when it comes to history, one of my favorite historians is Canadian, P.R. Burton. Wrote a whole rack of really great books that are just, he really, really could write. So it's not that I'm prejudiced against a country, although I have been terrified by bears on any number of occasions in Canada. But anyway, the next book is Anatomic by Adam Dickinson. A slim volume of Canadian poetry. Pretty close to an a-hole pig. Pretty close to Dirty Pool. Obviously, if I don't get to many slim volumes of poetry in America, it's unlikely I'm going to branch out to other countries. But the quote that Matt Ellis gives here is that Canadians pay attention to literary prizes. And I agree with that. That has certainly been the case. I have noticed Canadians really do. They pay attention to the literary prizes and value them in a way that I don't see in many other countries, except maybe Japan. I think that's fascinating. It certainly bodes well. It's possible that the whole country will be able to slip out from under the noxious cloud of Mordor. It's possible that the country in the 21st century may be able to graduate past the ultimate snoozer, Alice Munro, and maybe, give its literature a post-Munro era. But in any case, Anatomic I have not read, so that's a no. That is the first bean in this tally. The second one is This Wound is World by Billy Ray Belcourt, which is another slim volume of Canadian poetry. I believe that Matt Ellis refers to the author as Two-Spirit. I've heard other people referred to as Two-Spirit. I want to stress here, not as in any major point, not as an accusation of any kind, that there's no such thing as Two-Spirit, and that you can't call yourself that until you can prove that spirits exist. And since spirits don't exist, you can't prove that. So we're talking biology here and maybe psychology here. We are not talking theology, much less mythology. So kindly don't tell me that I am oppressing you by not believing in ghosts. There is no such thing as two-spirit until you can prove there's one spirit, and you can't do that. No one's ever been able to do that. But anyway, in any case, naturally that was going to get me going. But this is a slim volume of poetry, and of course I haven't read it. I think that this was the most unlikely thing on this list, the one that I'm probably least likely to read. But I'm not calling any of these a-hole picks. But that's a no. So Matt Ellis is up to 2 beans. The next one is How to Pronounce Knife by Souvankham Thammavongsa. And this made its way to my attention. here in the United States. And it is, yes, I did read it. It is deplorably bad. Just really, really bad. Just the type of thing where you get even 20, 30 pages in and you say, okay, you're posturing a lot here. And you are obviously unbelievably proud of yourself, but this is garbage. And it's the type of garbage that could only exist if you were encouraged all along. I've never had any serious criticism. So I unfortunately get that impression a lot with, for instance, Margaret Atwood, who's got to be 150. Well, one way or another, it could be that the point I'm getting at here is that the root cause of the often forgettable nature of CanLit is that the country is just too nice. It could be that Canadian writers aspiring to break the mold of Alice Munro, aunts consulting train schedules at the kitchen table, ought to have as their first critical readers Americans. It's possible that they should do that, or maybe Australians if you want to live on the wild side. But anyway, that How to Pronounce Knife is a yes, but it once again is not at all a recommendation. It is a complete waste of your time. Then the next one is Eunoia by Christian Bök. And as Matt Ellis points out, Eunoia is a word with all the vowels. And when you see an author dive in the grass for such a thing, which is, let's keep in mind, a gimmick, you know they're not going to do more than that. You know they aren't. If an author decides to wow the critics by writing an entire novel without using the letter E, you know that's all the novel's going to be. It's only going to be that exercise. It's not going to be anything else. There was no other reason for it to exist. And the segment that is read in Matt's video certainly underscores that. Just self-indulgent, poetry reading crowd nonsense. So the bit that I heard read, I certainly do not want to read more. But unfortunately for me, this is still a no. So that's 3 slim volumes of poetry and 3 no's. So we are up to 3 beans. Unfortunately, the last book is The Gallant Cause by Mark Zuehlke. And it's a straightforward, really good work of history, much like The Company, about Australians in the Spanish Civil War. You might think slightly recalcitrant subject matter, but the author makes it work. The author absolutely makes it work. And once again, it came my way. I don't think that The Gallant Cause ever had an American publisher. I must have, I know lots of publicists who don't work in America. It might be that one of them sent that to me, or maybe somebody else sent it to me. At some point or other, I did read it and was looking for it for this tag. I think I still have it, but I liked it quite a bit. It took a recalcitrant subject and makes it really good general reading. So it's a no, or a yes, rather. And if you've been calculating at home, you realize that Matt Ellis's debut BookTube channel, here's hoping that he keeps making videos. He acquits himself fairly well, at least by the graded curve that we're using for the second season of Has Steve Read It? He gets 3 beans. And some of you might be crying foul. Some of you might be saying I'm being too generous. All 3 of his beans are slim volumes of basically self-published Canadian poetry that is pretty close to a niche interest. That is pretty close to saying, well, who, unless they live here, would actually have read this stuff? I might be willing to say that, but it's a first video, and he does adjure me to be nice, so I'm going to try to be nice by saying those things count. Although, let's not make a habit of slim volumes of small print poetry. I'd be willing to bet that Eunoia has sold probably 500 copies. So it stands very little chance of getting to me. One way or another, we're gonna allow it. So there were no a-hole picks here. And Matt Ellis certainly did not lose. He's not 0, not 1, he's not 2. 3 beans is turning out to be the average here. He does not supplant the known sovereign of the universe, but he does respectively well, at least on the graded curve that we're using. So he is at 3 beans. That is not bad for a first showing. I'm really hoping, I'll take advantage of this video to really hope that he keeps making videos. I'll leave a link to the video that he makes for this challenge. I would suggest, of course, something that he already knows from rewatching that first video of his, which is that you either pick a different time of day to film or a different location to film, because there's no use holding up books if the sun is blasting them to a bright white nothing, you know. But one way or another, I'm hoping that he joins the adventure for all time rather than just for one video. But in any case, he is now added to season 2 of Has Steve Read It? All of these videos are, I have lost track of linking all of the ones down below, but fortunately Jim at Jim's Books, Reading, and Stuff is doing a playlist of all of the responses and all of my responses. So if I remember, I'll leave a link to that playlist so that you can keep track of the second season as it unfurls. There are plenty more entries to go through. So I'll be back tomorrow with another one. We'll see if anybody can beat 3 beans. Thank you, BookTube.